So if you remember last week, we did a display in our student view. And we're going to modify that a little bit and allow editing. So we're going to add an edit link to that. And so we're going to start by modifying our student controller. And we're going to add a couple of action methods. We're going to call them edit display, and one is going to basically route us to an edit screen, and then the other one is going to display after we have changed data and submitted. So one is going to have a post attribute. So I'm going to go ahead and enter this code, and I'm going to put it right below my index. And let me stop this because it does not like it when we change, doesn't like us to change the controller when we have things running. So you can see I put my post first, and I did use the validate anti-forgery token. Then I've got an edit display is what I'm calling it. You can see I'm using that bind attribute, including ID, last name, first mid name, and enrollment date. That's what I'm including. And I am using the student class to create a student object. I'm checking, first of all, to make sure. So this is when they've got the edit view, they've made changes, and they've submitted. So I'm checking to see if it's valid. If there's any errors, then I display the edit view again. If there's no errors, then you can see that I am basically changing the model state to say that I've modified the record, and I'm saving those changes. And then I am directing them back to the display. So the first time they click the edit display link, it's going to look for an ID. Okay, so this code here is pulling in the ID, and because we put a question mark, that means the ID doesn't have to be filled in. So we're checking to see if the ID is null. If it's null, that's a problem, right? Because if there is no ID, we have nothing to edit. So we are returning a little error here. So the status code is a bad request. That is being returned. That's what the user is going to see. And assuming that there is an ID, then we're going to execute this little find command on our student table, looking for that particular ID. And then we're going to store the data in a student object. If the student object is null, which means there's nothing in it because the find didn't work, then we are returning HTTP not found, which is another error condition. Otherwise, that means it did find it, it did populate our student object, and we can pass that student object along to the view. Okay, and this is the edit display view. So it's going to display editable input boxes so we can change the data. So that is what's going on in our controller. And the next thing we're going to check, we're just going to verify that we already have the display in our layout page. Let's look at shared and layout. Yep, and I do have the student display here, so that's good. What I'm going to do next is I'm going to actually edit that. And so let's open up our display page. And we need to add an action link. And this is going to be in the last column of the last row. So in the headers, you should have empty header here. And then down here in the rows, you should have an empty row. So in this empty row is where we're going to put this action link. And that should take us to our edit form. So let me save. And what we don't have yet is the edit form itself. And we're going to call this edit display. So if you want to go into the student controller, right click on edit display and add the view, you can do it that way. Or you can right click on student, add, and choose view. Okay, the view name does need to be edit display. Empty without model is correct. Use the layout page is correct. And we're going to click on add. And there is a lot to type in this. So I'm going to pause and get all of this entered. All right, so I've entered all of this. I'm going to save it. And you'll notice a lot of the codes you entered are things that we have been talking about this week and last week. You can see that we've got html.begin form, which gives us our opening form tag and creates the closing form tag at the bottom. We have the anti-forgery token to prevent the cross-site hack. We've got a little heading. Then we've got validation summary. This is set to true, meaning it's not going to put it at the top. The validation messages will not be at the top. They will be below the entry areas. Remember, you have to do false to get them at the top. And then we've got the form groups where we've got the label, the editor, and the validation message. Okay, and you'll notice that we're adding the classes for columns so we can get the forms all aligned correctly. So this little top section, again, we've got the label, editor, and validation message, okay, for each of the properties. We have our submit button, and then we have an action link that would take us back to the list or to our display. And we're including the jQuery validation bundle. So I'm going to run this. And in order to test it, I'm going to have to pull up the student display. And then we should see an edit link. Of course, it doesn't like it if you start there. And so now we're going to go to display students. Here's my edit link. Okay, and we've got the edit student display. And let me change. Let's see, first name, Skippy. We'll save that. And you can see that it did take the change. So my edit is working. So at this point, you have made all of the changes to Contasso that we need for our validation. The only other thing you may want to check is just to see how the summary looks. So I'm going to just come in here, change the summary to false. Let me save this, and then we'll do an error. And let's see, I think last name was required, right? Let me see. Okay. Let me see if I saved that because it should have thrown them up at the top. And then we'll go over here. And let me do more than one. Oh, that's interesting. Oh, it filled in last name. Okay, let me get rid of him. All right, now when there's more than one, that's when I'm starting to see it up here. Okay, let me get rid of the date, or let's put in a bogus one. It's interesting. The second time I save is when it's coming up there. Let me do a name that's maybe too long. Interesting. When I hit save twice is when I'm seeing them. So it's displaying in both spots. All right. I don't really want these bad changes, so I'm just going to go back. Oops. Probably should enter Skippy again. There. Okay. So that is what it looks like. I don't think that it's necessary to display that twice, so I'm going to change it back to true. Okay, so at this point, you are ready to add this to GitHub. What you're going to need to do after you have the entire project up there is copy the URL to your repo and paste that into the Dropbox.